With the New York Rangers having fired their head coach, Peter Laviolette, they're, of course, right now in the search for their next NHL head coach. And with that being said, there was some news that came out on Monday with Mike Sullivan and the Pittsburgh Penguins parting ways, which means there is another candidate that is officially available for the Rangers to potentially hire as their next head coach. And in the past, there have been lots of kind of talk and rumors and kind of buzz about the Rangers possibly hiring Mike Sullivan as their next head coach. And now that it's official that they parted ways, it can now potentially actually happen. And we have some news here from a couple insiders that kind of says the Rangers are right now the clear frontrunners and favorites to hire Mike Sullivan as their next head coach. And with him being arguably the kind of top guy on the market, this is definitely a potential good sign for the Rangers. So we're going to take a look at kind of how likely this scenario is that the Rangers hire him, as well as kind of talk about whether or not this would be a good or bad move for this franchise. So let's start off here with the connection between Chris Drury, the Rangers general manager, and Mike Sullivan. As Sullivan, back in 2009-10 and 2010-11, those two seasons there, right near the end of Chris Drury's career, his last two seasons in the NHL, Mike Sullivan was actually the assistant coach of the Rangers with Chris Drury on that team, so that's pretty interesting there. You know, Mike actually did coach Chris as a player right near the end of Chris's career, obviously with the Rangers, and then you go back to February of this year where we saw Chris Drury be the assistant general manager of Team USA for the Four Nations Face-Off tournament with Mike Sullivan being the official head coach. So you obviously have another connection there where Mike and Chris were both part of that staff there of Team USA at the Four Nations Face-Off tournament. And then you also date back to, 2010-11 and 2009-10 when Chris was a player for Mike as he was an assistant coach with the Rangers. So there is a previous connection, which definitely could potentially help the Rangers in hiring Mike this offseason. And there's been lots of talk amongst Rangers fans on kind of whether or not this team should go after maybe a younger head coach who could potentially be a first-time NHL head coach there. Obviously, we previously gone with guys like Gerard Gallant and Peter Laviolette, the previous two guys who Chris Drury hired, who are obviously more experienced veteran head coaches. So maybe it is a better idea to go after a younger guy, but if this team is going to go after a veteran head coach, I think Mike Sullivan is the absolute clear number one option out there available. I think Rick Tocchet, could be a decent option. Maybe Jay Woodcroft could be decent as well. There are some other all right options, but I think if they're going after a veteran head coach, Mike Sullivan is the by far number one candidate. I think there are some good young coaches out there and who could potentially be, the first time NHL head coaches, and I'm kind of an advocate for that. I think that wouldn't be a bad idea. But at the end of the day, if they were able to hire a guy like Mike Sullivan there, he is absolutely an exception to that, and I'd definitely be more than okay with Rangers hiring a guy like that who is all the experience, but Mike Sullivan is I think, phenomenal head coach, a quite good one, so I think that's where I'd be more than okay with it, but otherwise, if they're not going to get Mike, I would probably rather lean towards a younger guy. But like I said, there are some other decent veteran options. But Mike is the clear number one veteran head coach, experienced kind of guy out there who could potentially be hired by the Rangers. And of course, there are, like I said, a lot of kind of insiders who have kind of been pointing at the Rangers being the kind of by far leading kind of number one candidate to potentially hire Mike as their next head coach. So now let's take a look at what Elliotte Friedman had to say here. And this was from the Donnie and Dolly show, which is like a Vancouver-based, a show/podcast. And Elliotte Friedman ended up saying on that, in 2021, when Chris Drury was hired as GM, he didn't hire Gallant until he knew Sullivan was staying in Pittsburgh. Until someone beats the Rangers out for Sullivan's services, that's who I'm picking. He's their number one. So first off here, you've got Elliotte Friedman, who is a very reputable, obviously, insider, him saying that basically the New York Rangers have Mike Sullivan at the top of their list, and Mike Sullivan has the Rangers at the top of his list. Now you take a look at what Frank Saravalli had to say on Sportsnet, where he ended up basically saying on the matter that the Rangers are the very clear odds-on favorite to land Mike Sullivan as their next head coach, which I think that's pretty nice to hear. And of course, PK Subban isn't necessarily an insider, but he did go on, of course, ESPN's NHL coverage and list his 5 teams for potential fits with Mike Sullivan, and he ended up listing the Kraken at 5, Bruins at 4, Flyers at 3, Ducks at 2, and then made it clear that the Rangers were at number 1 for Mike Sullivan. And I think that makes a lot of sense there. Of course, there are some other teams that need head coaches, but the Rangers are, I would say, the kind of like best team. I mean, you take a look at the Kraken, Bruins, Flyers, and Ducks there. The Rangers are by far the best team, and I would say have the best chance to really compete next season for a cup. And I'm not saying the Rangers are definitely going to be a true top-tier cup contender, but let's be honest here, with a goalie like Igor Shesterkin in net there, the Rangers have the best chance of going the deepest in the playoffs out of the Kraken, Bruins, Flyers, Ducks, and Rangers. I think that's pretty clear. So Obviously, I'd imagine a veteran head coach there who, left Pittsburgh, who I'm assuming didn't want to stay there for a rebuild, would definitely want to go out there and, try and obviously, go to a contending team. And Pittsburgh may not go into a full-on rebuild, but that's kind of what they probably should do. And right now, they're definitely in a retool kind of mode. So obviously, Mike Sullivan probably wants to go to a team where he's going to be able to compete potentially for a cup and try and coach a cup contending team potentially. So going to the Rangers over teams like the Kraken, Bruins, Flyers, and Ducks, who are all either teams in a rebuild or just trying to come out of it, it definitely would make a lot of sense to go to the Rangers over those teams, in my opinion. And during this segment, this is what PK Subban had to say. Number one destination we're taking to the Tri-State. The New York Rangers, Subban said, "To me, this is a Stanley Cup team. They're going to tweak this lineup. Chris Drury will tweak this lineup this summer. He will get them back to where they need to be. With the right coach, this team could win the Stanley Cup," Subban said. "I think that if the New York Rangers make the right trades, the right pickups this offseason, and with Igor Shesterkin in net and the pieces they have in place, I think they can contend for the Stanley Cup as quickly as next season." And I'm not completely thinking he's wrong. I mean, honestly, I know some fans think this team is really, really far away from competing for a cup or possibly winning it. And I'm not saying by any means that this team is going to go out there and win the, 2025, 2026 Stanley Cup. I am not saying that. But what I am saying is you take a look at this roster, and I think some fans still don't realize how good Igor Shesterkin truly is in the playoffs. I want you to watch. If you don't think Igor is a great, phenomenal goalie, especially when it comes to the playoffs there, I want you to look at a guy like Connor Hellebuyck, who everyone talks about as the best goalie in the league right now, and how he's so good in the regular season, and he's absolutely phenomenal. But look what happens when it comes to the playoff. This guy falls flat in his face consistently. Connor Hellebuyck just does not show up in the brightest moments, and even in that Four Nations Face-Off tournament, he didn't play as good as he definitely, can and has played at moments, because maybe it was a big moment. He just doesn't seem to play the best when the lights shine brightest. And, for a goalie who is regarded as one of the best, getting paid like one of the top goalies, you don't see as much kind of criticism on him as you do as a guy like Igor Shesterkin, where, yes, he got that historic deal, and I know he got quite a bit more money than what Hellebuyck's making. I think Hellebuyck's around the $8.5 million mark, maybe. Obviously, Igor's up around 11.5, so there is a $3 million difference, but you also got to count in the fact that, Connor Hellebuyck signed his contract, not this year when obviously Igor did, so it is a little different. But you also have to remember, this cap is skyrocketing up, and I just really think that Igor Shesterkin is an absolutely incredible goalie. He shows up when the light shine brightest, and when you have a guy like that, I think it can really kind of change this team, and when you get to the playoffs there, you never know what can happen. And if we're being honest here, over the previous 3 playoff runs, not counting this season, but the previous 3 playoffs, Igor Shesterkin, if you take a look at the advanced numbers and just kind of watch the games, you can kind of see that Igor was clearly the best goalie in the playoffs over the previous 3 playoffs. It just in the entire league, he was the best goalie in the previous 3 playoffs. And when you really take a look at the stats, and I made videos about this in the past, and I made a video actually the other day kind of talking about it with yesterday with him and Hellebuyck mainly, but when you really take a look at the numbers there, Igor has clearly been, not really even debatable, the best goalie just over the last 3 playoff runs combined. You combine them all, he has been the most consistent and best goalie in the playoffs. And you also got to take a look and consider that he was pretty much carrying this team along through multiple of those playoff runs. I mean, to get to both of those conference finals, Igor Shesterkin had to do more than his fair share of the job. So I think in general, this team is not that far off of really getting back on track here towards competing. This team made it to the conference finals last season there. It still has a lot of the same players, and I know that's not necessarily a great thing because of the fact that Igor carried this team, but we have started to see some change with this roster. I think some of the moves have been decent, some of the moves have been bad. Obviously, he's not going to be perfect, and I don't think Chris Drury is a phenomenal GM. I don't think he's also like a bottom 3 GM, but I just think if Chris Drury, like Subban said, can make some good moves here and can make some good trades and, add in a top 4 defense, maybe ship out guys like Keandre and Kreider, add in a third-line center, and some of these young guys kind of take some steps up, why can't this team be a cup contender? Why can't they with a goalie like Igor Shesterkin in net, who season in and season out has proven to be an elite playoff performer. I'll repeat that one more time. An elite playoff performer, unlike Connor Hellebuck, who does not show up when the lights shine brightest. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button, as it does help the channel out a ton, and I would really appreciate it. And of course, don't forget to comment down below your thoughts and opinions, whether you disagree or agree with me. Let me know your thoughts on this whole situation here in the comment section down below. I'll catch you in the next one, and let's go Rangers.